Number 1, come prepared. When you come to a first interview, it's really important to have knowledge about the company you're interviewing with, as well as the product that the company is selling. You also have to look at the LinkedIn profiles of the interviewers, as well as other people within the same organization. I also always recommend to do a bit of research around the technology that the company uses, either from job ads or from looking at their online website. And obviously, if they are a software as a service company, they may have an online presence and possibly an area behind login. It is actually possible to reverse engineer a little bit of their technology choices by using the Chrome console and having a look at the kind of traffic between the front end and the back end. The more information you can actually collect upfront, the easier it's going to be to have a conversation with your interviewer. Number 2, talk about your achievement. Many first interviews start with a question around talking a little bit about yourself. Now, it's really important to bring up description of achievements in your current or past roles, and obviously not having one is a red flag in itself. Just be mindful not to oversell or undersell yourself. Describe projects where you actually didn't have as much input or achievements that cannot be really 100% traced back to you. At the same time, giving as much information as possible about the projects you worked on, what worked, what didn't, and what was your learnings out of those projects is actually your main goal here. Number 3, know your CV. It is quite common for software engineers to fill up their CVs with a lot of acronyms and references to technologies. Now, it's really important that whatever technology you've put in your CV, you've actually used it professionally. If you haven't used a certain technology, just remove it from the CV and don't mention stuff you're not really familiar with. As far as technologies you're actually familiar with, explain why that technology was used, and if you agreed or you didn't agree with the position, and what was your role in the decision-making process. This is not rocket science. You might very well be discussing points around team composition, as well as familiarity of other team members with the technology. Again, you don't have to find impossible reasons, but make sure that you actually have those reasons prepared in case you are asked for. Number 4, know your tech. It's important to actually have a clear understanding, of course, of the technology for which you are supposed to have skills and knowledge in. But more importantly, it's actually quite important to come to a first interview with knowledge around what's new and what's happening and what's more exciting in each and every technology you are more familiar with. So if you're interviewing for a Java position, it's important to have a knowledge around the latest features of Spring Boot or latest version of Spring, the reactive features, for example, or the features of a language, Java 8, 9, 10, 11, and what's happening effectively in the Java world. If you're interviewing for a Node.js backend position, it's important to mention advances or new features introduced in the V8 engine and the Node.js runtime. If you're interviewing for a front-end position, obviously discussions around TypeScript, promises, build tools, WebAssembly, everything that is new and shiny, it's important that you actually have an understanding of it, even if you haven't used it. If you're interviewing, for example, for a Golang backend position, not knowing the differences between channels and mutexes, or when to use one or the other, or the whole discussion that is happening with Golang version 2 as well as error handling can be detrimental. Obviously, you have to have knowledge around cross-cutting concerns, for example, databases, the difference between SQL and NoSQL, where what works best and why. If you're familiar with distributed databases, the concept of data consistency across multiple nodes. And if you feel really, really confident, even mentioning the CAP theorem could be a good idea. If you're not confident 100% with a technology or a concept, don't bring it up yourself. Nowadays, everybody needs to have some knowledge around CI/CD as well as cloud technologies and containers. You don't have to have an in-depth technology across all of these, but having played with those and have an understanding of how these can work in production and what advantages they bring to the table, it's paramount. Another important topic to cover is queuing technologies. Of course, everybody is familiar with the concepts around Kafka nowadays, and if you're not, please go and have a look. There's plenty of tutorials online, as well as the cut-down version that AWS offers under the name of Kinesis. If you've also worked with different older technologies like RabbitMQ and ActiveMQ, feel free to bring them up. although be careful because those early days queuing technologies suffered from a lot of drawbacks, so you need to be able to explain what those drawbacks were. Number 5, testing. Now, we will be publishing a different piece specifically on testing, but it's really important to come to a first interview with a rough idea about what works and what doesn't in the testing space. When we talk about testing, we're talking primarily about automated testing, but having an idea where manual testing, for example, UI can work is also important. When we talk about testing, we're talking about the concept of testing pyramids, the amount of tests that you do at different levels, and the concept of ROI, or return on investment, of a testing strategy. It's also important to be able to answer questions around testing coverage, which are always a bit tricky. But suffice to say that 80% is that kind of magic number that seems to make everybody happy. Number 6, architectural knowledge. When it comes to architecture, there's two sides of it: code architecture as well as systems architecture. When we think about code architecture, we think about design pattern, code structure, as well as concepts like dependency injection. You need to be familiar with all of the above, even though you may not be able to remember by heart all the design patterns. You need to be able to articulate a reasonable code structure, for example, for a RESTful API, as well as what dependency injection is. When it comes to system architecture, with a proliferation of microservices, every developer does architecture. So it's really important to understand the pros and cons of a distributed system with multiple microservices, and being able to describe the systems you're working on in your current job or previous role. When it comes to distributed systems and microservices, it's also quite common to think about transactions in terms of synchronous or asynchronous. And this goes together with the fact that modern queuing technologies are more and more common. Now, you need to be able to articulate what are the main differences between synchronous and asynchronous systems, as well as what are the drawbacks or advantages of each choice. Number 7, handling conflict. Now, this may or may not come out at a first interview, but it's nevertheless important to come prepared. The way you handle conflict is to take off the table your personal issues and grudges against people, and to bring the discussion to evaluating options in terms of pros and cons, what works, what doesn't, the advantages of each and every solution with an open mind. It's important, obviously, to not be black and white or argumentative, and an interviewer will most likely question you on that, as well as to have an understanding and have an opinion on when to use certain technologies and when not to. Number 8, production experience. Now, if you're not asked about specific production experience, don't bring this up, especially on the first interview. But if you are, be ready to discuss examples of experience of failure and what were the learnings that you actually got out of it. Now, it's very important to tie this conversation to the concept of observability and monitoring as a building block for your software. Again, if this is not brought up, don't bring it up yourself. But number 9, convey maturity. Now, this is a very important concept. All throughout your discussion and all throughout your narration, it's important to convey the message that you're bringing your interviewer on a journey. And that journey is your journey of maturation, of what you have learned to be more relaxed about and what is actually more important for you and non-negotiable. As you express your non-negotiable points, it's important not to be too black and white about them. You may see that your interviewer may have slightly different opinions. So it's important to be able to substantiate your opinions and your views with some specific experience. But again, all in all, it's about bringing your interviewer in your maturation journey to show that you have actually learned a lot in your career, no matter how long. Number 10, be positive. Last but not the least, it's really important to convey a message of positivity all throughout your first interview. Now, this can be complicated. If you're looking for another job, you're most likely disenchanted and not really happy in your current position. It's important to understand that there's no perfect job, and so there's good and bad environments and things that work and they don't. So the more you can detach yourself from your feelings and emotions about your current job, and the more you can actually discuss what is really working and what could use some improvements and have a positive attitude, you should be all right. To supplement this, it's important to also discuss elements around side projects and stuff that just gets you excited, new technologies, new approaches that you've tried during your own spare time, or you try to implement in your current job, even though you weren't successful. It still conveys the message that you like to innovate and you look at the future with a positive approach.